My background is I worked in banking and finance for 10 years. After banking and finance in 10 years, I actually went and ran human rights organisations for 5 years. I then became an educator. In that time, I've become increasingly frustrated with the curriculum and the way that we teach. You know, if you look at a university was set up 1,000 years ago, right? You look at a PhD, it was set up in 1880, right? The world has changed so dramatically in this time, but the education system in many ways hasn't changed. So I'll give you a story about the education system and its failure. Or maybe not its failure, but one that says that it could do much, much better. So I have a friend of mine, he runs a design company. And he put out an advert wanting to bring in 4 interns. The interns were all engineers, that's what he wanted. He got 77 applications. Looked at the applications, couldn't decide who to interview, so decided to interview all 77. First interview quarter to 8 on a Monday morning, last interview quarter past 5 on a Friday. 77 people. First thing he notices is that most of them are boys, very few women. The second thing that happens is he gets the first person comes in and says, as he's interviewing him, says, okay, ask him all these questions, chat. The student does quite well. And he says, okay, now show me something you've built. And the student says, oh, I've built a water pump. Pulls a water pump out of his bag, puts it on the table and says, here's the water pump. And he goes, oh, that's pretty impressive. How does it work? You know, writes down water pump, you know, big question mark, you know, big exclamation mark, very impressed with the water pump. Second student comes along, different university. Says, chat, discuss, interview, all goes very well. He goes, oh, show me something you've built. And the student says, oh, yeah, I'll show you. Goes into his bag and pulls out a water pump. Says, oh, show me how it works. The student says, well, you know, it goes in here, water comes out there, it's a water pump. And he goes, okay, that's pretty cool, interesting. Third student comes along, have an interview, says, oh, show me something you've built. Student says, oh, yeah, no worries, leans into his bag, pulls out, water pump. Doesn't take him long to figure out that all these students, sometime in their 3rd year at university, across all universities across Australia, are all doing exactly the same curriculum. Right? They're all building water pumps, all of them. And so he says, how do you pick a student? This goes on, 10th student, 11th student, 14th student, 25th student. Feels compelled to keep on asking him about the water pump, right? Learns more about water pumps in that day than what he ever needs to know. The 25th student comes along and he says, oh yeah, chat, show me something you've built. Student leans in and says, I built a water pump. He goes, yeah, show me the water pump. And he goes, okay, leans in, he goes, I didn't bring it, but I brought some photos of it. And pulls out his laptop. It's an Apple MacBook Air. And the MacBook Air is wrapped in gaffer tape. He opens it up and he goes, stop, what's that? And he goes, it's a computer. He goes, no, not the computer. What's around the Apple? What's around the computer? And he says, oh, I make my own covers. He goes, why? He goes, most of them are expensive or the cheaper ones are no good. So I've designed my own cover. And he goes, well, talk me through the process. And he sort of talks about how he sells it to his friends, how he does it for his friends, just using gaffer tape. Really effective, shows him how effective it is. And he says, you've got the job, right? Now, the story, for me, summarises what's frustrating about our education system. The world is changing rapidly, and we're still caught up in these same old models. An hour is not some sort of magical amount which is a perfect amount of time to pass on education. It's a unit of time. But somehow, our whole education system, it fits around this unit of time, not about what's the best way to teach. So I think about the guys that invented the universities, and then I think about, you know, like 400 years ago, the guys that invented the modern university, or what looked like the modern university. And I imagine what those dudes would say if they saw this, right? An iPhone 5 or an iPhone 6. And I think about, you know, I show this to my students, and in here is Australia's first mobile phone. It weighed 10 kilos. Right? It had no phone, it had no camera, no Facebook, no social media, no address book. It was just 10 kilo weight of a phone. And that was supposed to be a mobile. I want you to pick up one of these chairs and walk around for 5 minutes. This is probably about 3 kilos. Like trip 3 of these and that's what you get. And that's supposed to be a mobile phone. Right? So I say to my students, what would you rather lose? Your phone or your wallet? And all of them say, I'd rather lose my wallet. Right? When I was growing up, you can't lose your phone because it was stuck to the wall, right? And so it's a radical different time to what it was like when I was at university. But what I was taught is to teach the same way as I was taught. Knowledge is not what it used to be. Higher education institutes used to own knowledge. All education institutes used to own knowledge. Primary school, high school, universities, they all own knowledge. Okay? And so in a way, it was content, no different to what record labels or newspapers used to own. What made them powerful was content, the owners of content. But nobody owns content anymore. So this is what it was like when I went to uni. It was very much the professor stood at the front and basically shared knowledge, right? And this is what it's like now, right? This is what it's like now, where I'm just one voice of many. Right? And that voice is mediated by lots of other voices, right? And some of those voices are great, and some of them are problematic. Some of them create chaos, some of them are great. And it's funny, like I remember being in a queue at a lecture once, a queue for a coffee before a lecture once, and I was lining up, and one of the students turned around and said to me, I heard the lecture's cancelled. And I'm like, it's not cancelled. Like, no, it's cancelled. And I said, no, it's not. And they're like, yes, it is. I said, how do you know? He said, it was on Facebook. I'm like, but I'm the lecturer. I'm the one that would know if it's cancelled or not. And they're like, yeah, but no, it's cancelled. And I turned up, and there was no one there. And there was like 3 people there. They were all over 50. And I was like, why are you guys here? And they're like, because we're not on Facebook, right? So you know what I mean? It was kind of one of those wacky moments. But again, right, it shows a kind of different relationship that's built between myself and my students. So the other thing is about careers. One time you became an accountant, you studied accounting, you became an accountant. So, but how do we educate students at a time when they're going to have multiple careers? And Fast Company magazine estimated that students starting university today will have 7 careers in their lifetime. Like, I went from banking to human rights to education, and it's a massive change. I can't imagine doing that 4 more times. So again, as an education institute, people that are interested in education, no matter what level, right, and policymakers and others, people that are employing graduates must think about, well, what is it that we're teaching students? What is that we're learning? What is it that we're promoting? Now, so traditionally, we're very good at this, at teaching knowledge, and that's the content. But that, for me, is no longer enough. We've got to teach something else. What that something else is, I think, is open. And we've had innovations in education, but my argument is that we don't know what the big disruption in innovation is, in education is. And so the question I ask my colleagues is, what does an Uber university look like? We've had improvements in technology, and we've had other things, but really in many ways they're just messing around the edges. There's not been yet a massive disruption to education, right? And there needs to be, because the curriculum we're teaching is not the curriculum that's serving us for the future. Now, this is a model that I've built over research about 4 or 5 years, which talks about some of the skills that I think we need to teach students. And this is kind of skills that actually promote a kind of a psyche of a culture of innovation. Now, nothing I'm saying here is criticising the need for engineers to be good engineers. I want my engineers to build bridges that aren't going to collapse, or to build planes that will fly, right? But what else am I teaching them? All right? And I think that's our challenge. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I'll start with an example about literacy, and then I'll move on to this concept of mistakability. I mean, I always talk about how when I was at uni, I was in my second year economics class with 120 students in that class, right? And there was, when we were given an assignment, it was about Australia's manufacturing policy. And the lecturer put up the assignment and said, there is one book in the library that gives you the information you need. And so everybody just got up out of the lecture and ran to the library to be the first to get the book. And what they were confronted by was this thing called closed reserve, right? Now, I tell my students this, and they think I'm talking about science fiction, right? They don't believe that it's real, right? They ask me what century I was born. And I say, yeah, it used to be one book for 120 students. It was a time of information scarcity. You'd go there, you'd give your card, you'd face the scariest women ever born, right? Because that's the only people they they employed there to work in closed reserve, and they wouldn't feed them all day, I'm sure, right? And it's kind of like my partner when her food sugars go down, but don't tell her, don't record that, Matt. So anyway, so the thing was the time of information scarcity. Now we live in a time of information abundance. If you do a search by Australia's manufacturing policy, you get something like 1.8 million hits. It's a massive change. But a lot of it focuses on writing an essay about Australia's manufacturing policy. It doesn't focus on about the quality of the data, where to get, how do we manage all this data? Right? And that's as important for an art student as it is for an engineering student, as it is for a computing student. The second thing is this idea about mistakability. Every student worth their weight at a university aims for one thing, to get the perfect grade point average. Right? And that is how you aggregate the average marks across the year. Now, I say to my students this: you can write me an essay that you've written 100 times before. Or you can do something radically different. If you do something radically different, like a photo essay, or make me a film, or do something like that, right, I'll mark it differently. 95% of the students will always pick the essay because they're too scared of getting it wrong. And it's not just universities. If you go to high schools, they teach students, don't get it wrong. If you think about everything else we do, we learn from our mistakes. So my partner's birthday, I didn't buy flowers, I learned from my mistake, right? Now, I got a daughter who's did a HSC about 2 years ago. And she's my adopted daughter. We adopted her when she was like 15, and I went inside. I'm a professor in sociology, right? So she's in her room with 3 of her friends studying for their English exam. I'm like, this is my bread and butter. So I'm like, I'm going to go show her how smart I am and go talk about their assignment, right? So I walk into their study room, and I'm like, hey, how you guys doing? And they're like, good. And I said, what are you guys doing? They're going, we're studying. I'm like, how are you studying? And they're like, oh, we're just memorising our essays. And I'm like, what do you mean? I said, no, can I help you? And they're like, can you memorise it for us? They're like, no. And they're like, I mean, how can you memorise, what are you doing? They said, well, our teacher said to us that what we should do is read the first line in the essay, answer the question directly with that first line, and then just write our memorised essay, right? That's study, right? And we had a meeting at our university with about 25 really senior principals, really well known, from really high profile schools, and I gave them that scenario, and none of them admitted to me in public that that's what they encourage their students to do. 18 of the 25 admitted to me in private that that's what they encourage their students to do, memorise essays. Right? That is not a culture of innovation. That is not a culture that's going to promote thinking differently. That is not a culture that prepares us for the challenges of the future.